Hello and welcome to the Weekly Parashahcast. This is Shmuel Moshe, and this week we will be reviewing the Torah portion for Vayera. That is the Torah portion for the 4th of November 2023, the 20th of Cheshvan 5784. As always, keep in mind that I am not a professional Torah scholar, just someone who wanted to study Torah. Let's begin. First off, coming in off of the heels of Lech Lecha, Abraham just recently finished with his formal covenant, the circumcision, which was then applied to all of the males of his house. Now, moving into chapter 18 of Genesis, we begin. The first portion for Vayera. Genesis chapter 18. Now the Lord appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, and he was sitting at the entrance of the tent when the day was hot. And he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing beside him. And he saw, and he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent, and he prostrated himself to the ground. And he said, My lords, if only I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from beside your servant. Please let a little water be taken, and bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And I will take a morsel of bread, and sustain your hearts. Afterwards you shall pass on, because you have passed by your servant. And they said, So shall you do, as you have spoken. And Abraham hastened to the tent of Sarah, and he said, Hasten 3 seah of meal and fine flour, knead and make cakes. And to the cattle did Abraham run, and he took a calf, tender and good, and he gave it to the youth, and he hastened to prepare it. And he took cream and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he placed them before them. And he was standing over them under the tree, and they ate. And they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, your wife Sarah will have a son. And Sarah heard from the entrance of the tent, and it was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, coming on in years. Sarah had ceased to have the way of the women. And Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I have become worn out, will I have smooth flesh? And also my master is old. And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh? Saying, Is it really true that I will give birth although I am old? Is anything hidden from the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. All right, so that concludes the first Torah portion. So right off the bat, Abraham receives a visit from the Lord, but it comes in the form of 3 men. Now this is very interesting to me because first and foremost, we have been establishing consistently, right, the idea that there is a singular Most High God that is significant here. But in this example, it seems that there are 3 people. So what's the deal with that? Why is God appearing in the form of 3 men? So I've heard interpretations of this being that these 3 are representatives, that they are angels, and that he is able to recognize the holy and spiritual aspects of these individuals. So when he throws himself to the ground, he speaks and preaches out to the Lord. But he also says, My lords, if only I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from beside your servant. So it's interesting that he speaks in the plurality here, lords, because there are 3, but also something that comes up kind of regularly in the passages leading up to this particular portion. There have been a few instances of the statement, we, or for example, being made in our image. So this plurality definitely looks to be a bit conflicting on the subject of monotheism. But as we will typically accept, it is that among these heavenly hosts, there is a highest one of them, and then also lesser beings who act as the sort of emissaries on earth. So this way, the Lord himself does not appear physically, but instead sends someone down on his behalf as his ambassador or representative to liaison with mortal men. And so that seems to be who these 3 are. But it is absolutely, for me, definitely something that is very, very curious and even a little concerning. The idea that Abraham, who's made a covenant with a singular Most High God, is now bowing down before these individuals. But because he recognizes that they are here on behalf of that, I suppose we could consider it, the heavenly host, maybe the army of God or the cohort of God. This makes some sense in that context. So because he recognizes their level of spiritual importance. He reveres them and speaks to them in such a way that is reflective of their station as emissaries of God. Now, on the other hand, it's also the dialogue that takes place, and they said to him, "Where is your wife?" Right? And he said, "I will surely return to you at this time next year." So interesting, right? Verse 9 is they said to him, so they asked the question, and he said, "I will return to you." So it seems that those three are indeed there to represent, while the voice of God speaks directly to Abraham as the individual. So it's certainly significant. We have either these people speaking as a conduit or the voice itself being direct to Abraham, while these three sort of represent it in this physical world. Definitely something curious. Now, another thing, Sarah is heard for her internal thoughts. It says she thought that she wouldn't conceive, and inside she laughed. She laughed internally. So, interesting, right? This is something that is not expressed outwardly, but just the fact that she felt it and thought it, the Lord hears this and chastises a little bit, right? So something significant and interesting about this, unlike Abraham, who is completely unwavering, blind faith, if God says so, he believes so, Sarah has doubt. She is not as thoroughly convicted of belief. So she laughs like, "Oh, of course, yeah, sure. Me? Despite how old I am and how old he is? Uh-huh." But to be fair, she's an old woman, and it even indicates that, she's no longer, she's ceased to have the way of the women. So in other words, she's no longer menstruating, her cycle's done. She's had her menopause, so she's no longer viable for childbirth, at least is the perception. So we can understand from a human perspective why she would laugh like that. One other thing is the choice of preparing an offering. So Abraham, again, very, very smart, very hospitable guy, but also because that brings great fortune and favor to do so. So not only does Sarah get the task of making the cakes, but also it says that he brought it to the lad when it comes to the offering of the young animal, right? So I can only assume that it's referring to Ishmael to be the one to do it. So even though he's not named, the youth, right? The youth is the one who's assigned that. I'm going to assume that means Ishmael had a hand in this. And also, again, the significance of his son, who he treats as his son. So, I mean, what's the big deal, right? He's his boy, and he's involved in making this offering. So, properly respected as the boy, as the son of Abraham, and given this very important task of preparing the animal for the guest. One other thing that's kind of curious about this is the notion of his ability to recognize these individuals as significant, right? So the Lord appeared to Abraham, so he gets this perception, this vision, but then he also sees these guys, and he starts talking to them with a level of reverence of somebody who is beneath them, which is, of course, his humility, but also his recognizing. So it almost makes me wonder that in those days of awe and wonder, those days of miracles in the ancient world, were things like this relatively common? Was it not so uncommon to see divine figures just walking around like anybody else's day, anybody else's business? They're just on the earth walking around. It's possible. It's certainly possible. We hear about how the Watchers come down, right? Those assigned, the nobles, right? Those for the Nephilim are the children of the nobles. So in this context, the nobles might be those of a high status in heaven. Those who have been, again, we look at my lords, and then we also use the word nobles. It sort of checks out. So going back to the pre-Noah time period and hearing about them as like the children of nobles, I think we can thoroughly conclude that they are angels in that context, just as those who came down before. And Abraham recognizes this, and he will not take the chance of failing to give them a proper offering, but also, in turn, that could lead to quite a blessing as well. So is this done out of fear, out of reverence, maybe a little of both? On to second portion. Chapter 18, verse 15. And Sarah denied, saying, I did not laugh, because she was afraid. And he said, No, but you laughed. And the men arose from there, and they looked upon Sodom, and Abraham went with them to escort them. And the Lord said, Shall I conceal from Abraham what I am doing? And Abraham will become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the world will be blessed in him. For I have known him, because he commands his sons and his household after him, that they should keep the way of the Lord to perform righteousness and justice, in order that the Lord bring upon Abraham that which he spoke concerning him. And the Lord said, Since the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and since their sin has become very grave, I will descend now and see whether according to her cry which has come to me, they have done destruction, and if not, I will know. And the men turned from there and went to Sodom, and Abraham was still standing before the Lord. And Abraham approached and said, Will you even destroy the righteous with the wicked? Perhaps there are 50 righteous men in the midst of the city. Will you even destroy and not forgive the place for the sake of the 50 righteous men who are in its midst? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to put to death the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be like the wicked. Far be it from you. Will the judge of the entire earth not perform justice? And the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous men within the city, I will forgive the entire place for their sake. And Abraham answered and said, Behold now, I have commenced to speak to the Lord, although I am dust and ashes. Perhaps the 50 righteous men will be missing 5. Will you destroy the entire city because of 5? And he said, I will not destroy if I find there 45. And he continued further to speak to him, and he said, Perhaps 40 will be found there. And he said, I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, Please let the Lord's wrath not be kindled, and I will speak. Perhaps 30 will be found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Behold now, I have desired to speak to the Lord. Perhaps 20 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy for the sake of the 20. And he said, Please let the Lord's wrath not be kindled, and I will speak yet this time. Perhaps 10 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. And the Lord departed when he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So now we have the reason at the end of portion 2 for why these 3 men have appeared in the desert, why they are wandering through Mamre, why they are on their journey. It's because they are here on a mission to go and scout out the deeds of the city of Sodom, as well as Gomorrah. Their sin has become very grave. I will descend now and see whether according to her cry, which has come to me. So I find that phrase interesting, according to her cry being the cry of the city, the cry of the earth. Who is her, right? So just something to kind of keep in mind, according to her cry. Whose cry? This is one of those situations where you really wish you had the exact Hebrew rather than the English to understand the context for that sort of sentence. But in any case, the Lord is hearing something's going wrong in that city. It's very, very, very sinful. And I'm going to go down and make my judgment. And if they are indeed, as I believe they are, or as it seems to be that they are so wicked, they will be judged. And if not, I will spare them. And Abraham keeps this in mind. He is very mindful that there's someone important to him living in Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as his own relationship with the people of that place because of the war that took place earlier in the previous portions. So his nephew, Lot, lives in that area. He is a dweller, a sojourner in that particular city. So obviously, if everybody there is going to be eradicated, that includes Lot. That's not good. He must do what he must do in order to protect his nephew, as he has always done, right? Everything he's done in relation to his nephew, you can really see the abundance of love and care he has for his kinsman, how far he's willing to go to make sure that nothing can go wrong, and that he can be saved, whether he's abducted by enemies or he's now at the risk of being purged with an entire city. This is the lot he has landed in life, and it is Abraham's lot to look out for Lot, his nephew. So, wordplay aside, this is what Abraham does. He begins to negotiate, And he's very, very reverent about it. He's, of course, saying, oh, please, Lord, if it's not too much trouble for me to speak and upset you by being so bold, what if I find 50, or maybe if you only find 45, or even 30, or 10? You know, so he keeps lowering the requirement for the sake of Lot, because the reality is Abraham probably knows, yeah, that's a pretty corrupt place. Why would he be so concerned? He's aware. He's familiar with that entire area to some extent. He knows how they are. He's been there. But also just the chance of, man, Lot will be destroyed. And not just Lot. I mean, Abraham doesn't seem to be a particularly malicious person. He's certainly capable of going to war. But the idea of an entire people being purged is certainly something that probably does not settle so well. And I'm sure there's also some generational trauma related to the flood. So just those sorts of things in mind, it's certainly understandable that Abraham goes so far as to be so vocal as an advocate for those people. And also in the very first line, Sarah denied, saying, I did not laugh, because she was afraid. That's the significance, right? She was afraid. She was afraid of being caught having doubted. So that's the interesting thing about Sarah here. It acknowledges that she's lying, or she denied. And so maybe it's just acknowledging the level of power of being able to see even inside of one's thoughts, right? So this is important because it talks about, I think, conviction as a concept. It shows that what doesn't matter is what you do out loud, but what you truly feel in your heart. So, for example, someone can say, oh, I wholly and thoroughly swear that I love the Lord and I am devoted to him, right? But inside, maybe he's thinking something else. By saying exactly this, that Sarah internally laughed and thought, that's ridiculous. It shows that the Lord is aware of the true nature of people's hearts, not what they do outwardly, but what they think internally. This is very significant. Now, she's not punished for thinking it, but he does say, I know, I'm well aware. You can't hide this from me. But he doesn't punish her. She, on the other hand, is rightfully terrified of this individual deity because this individual deity is all-powerful. And oh, no, please don't do it. Please don't punish me. So anyway, the real reason, I'm not here for that. Let's talk about this. These three men are on their way to go be my scouts, and then I will just send to that city. So you can almost look at them as sort of like the advancing vanguard to go scout things out, or even just like spies, which comes up again in the future for the tribes as well. The notion of spies to go scout out the land. So Abraham escorts them, and he also hears the consideration of God saying, will I keep the secret from Abraham of what I'm here to do? I'll tell him. You know, he considers whether or not to even tell Abraham the plan. So it's interesting. It's interesting that Abraham's deeds are the reason he finds out. The fact that the Lord is considering, well, maybe not. Okay. I'll tell Abraham. Verse 22, and the men turned from there and went to Sodom, and Abraham was still standing before the Lord. So this phrase, the men turned from there and went to Sodom. So in the beginning, we see that there are three men, right? Verse 22 says, then they turned and went to Sodom. Abraham was still standing before the Lord. I want to bring that up because of what's going to happen in the very beginning of the third portion to really tie this together. Chapter 19, third portion. And the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And Lot saw and arose toward them, and he prostrated himself on his face to the ground. And he said, behold now, my lords, please turn to your servant's house, and stay overnight, and wash your feet, and you shall arise early and go on your way. And they said, no, but we will stay overnight in the street. And he urged them strongly, and they turned in to him, and came into his house. And he made them a feast, and he baked unleavened cakes, and they ate. When they had not yet retired, and the people of the city, the people of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, the entire populace from every end. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, and let us be intimate with them. And Lot came out to them to the entrance, and he shut the door behind him. And he said, My brethren, please do not do evil. Behold, now I have 2 daughters who were not intimate with a man. I will bring them out to you, and do to them as you see fit. Only to these men do nothing, because they have come under the shadow of my roof. But they said, Back away. And they said, This one came to sojourn, and he is judging. Now we will deal even worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard upon the man Lot, and they drew near to break the door. And the men stretched forth their hands, and they brought Lot to them to the house, and they shut the door. And the men who were at the entrance of the house they struck with blindness, both small and great, and they toiled in vain to find the entrance. And the men said to Lot, Whom else do you have here? A son-in-law, your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, take out of the place. For we are destroying this place, because their cry has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went forth and spoke to his sons-in-law, the suitors of his daughters, and he said, Arise, go forth from this place, for the Lord is destroying the city. But he seemed like a comedian in the eyes of his sons-in-law. And as the dawn rose, the angels pressed Lot, saying, Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you perish because of the iniquity of the city. But he tarried, and the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand, and the hand of his 2 daughters, out of the Lord's pity for him. And they took him out and placed him outside the city. And it came to pass, when they took them outside, that he said, Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stand in the entire plain. Flee to the mountain, lest you perish. And Lot said to them, Please do not, O Lord. Behold now, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have increased your kindness which you have done with me to sustain my soul. But I cannot flee to the mountain, lest the evil overtake me, and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee there, and it is small. Let me please flee there. Is it not small? And my soul will survive. So here we have the arrival of the 2 angels in Genesis chapter 9, the first verse. 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, as we conclude the 3rd portion. So why am I bringing up the significance of 2 verses 3? Now we have some clarity, right? So Abraham arrived earlier, saw that the Lord appeared before him with 2 others. So in other words, now we know who the identity of the 3 was. One of them was God. 2 of them were the angels. The 2 carried on without the 1, who stayed behind and chatted with Abraham for a while. So the 2 angels come in, and Lot, being such a man as he is, immediately recognizes what kind of individuals they are. He has the spiritual knowledge and respect to realize these are messengers of God. These are the hosts, right? These are the ones. So he goes above and beyond to be a great host, but not just that he will tend to them as a host, but that also they should really not stay in the streets of the city. And as it shows right away, the night isn't even thoroughly on, and the people of the city basically show up at his door and start demanding that he give them the newcomers who've wandered in. They want to be intimate with them. And we know exactly what that means, because in the next language used to describe his daughters have not been intimate with anyone, or at least not. I have 2 daughters who are not intimate with a man. I will bring them out to you, and do to them as you see fit. Right? So Lot is basically putting his own daughters and their virtue out as an offering, instead of being a poor host who gives up his charges, being these new guests who are also significantly spiritual individuals, holy people. But the deeds of Lot in doing this, the willingness that he has, baking for them, hosting for them a feast, being such a gracious and reverent host, they look out for him. So as the people who are wicked of the city demand and start wanting to attack Lot and even do worse to him than they were going to do to the newcomers, the angels step in. They blind those guys, prevent them from being able to find the entrance of the home, and they also take Lot in and basically just tell him, all right, listen, man, here's the deal. We're destroying everything. Another thing about Lot that's interesting here is that they criticize him for being a sojourner. So in other words, you're a foreigner, and you think you can judge us? Oh, yeah, you're really in for it. So it's almost, they do him a little bit of a favor. The way that they talk to him like that, in the eyes of these angels, it becomes very, very clear that, yes, Lot is not only a righteous man, but he's not one of them. So we should definitely protect this individual. And we're going to destroy it. But since you're such a good guy, you and all the people who dwell with you, and even the sons-in-laws, the daughters, suitors, you may all survive. Unfortunately, those men don't even listen to him. They think he's a jokester. They treat him like he's a clown, a comedian. They don't take the word of God very seriously, and unfortunately for them, they have sealed their own fate. And the really beautiful thing about Lot as a person, they tell him, be quick about it and get out of here, but he doesn't. He takes his time. So why, a man who's so fearful and so aware of the power of these individuals, why would he be so slow to leave? And this is once again really something that speaks to the righteousness of this man. Why would he tarry? Why would he delay? Maybe it's because they want to gather their belongings to bring with them. Maybe it's because he still hasn't given up on trying to save the people. And think about it from the perspective of Abraham. If I can find just 10 people, just 10, then you'll spare the whole city, right? So what is Lot doing? They haven't communicated, but you can maybe assume that the two of them are of the same quality. If I can only find someone to prove that they are a good people, if I can only find just a few people to redeem all of them, then we could save everyone. But the angels basically, they won't take it any longer. They won't wait any longer. It's happening. So they literally guide him and his people out by the hand, the 4 of them. They tell them, don't look back, and go hide in the mountains. The evil will take me in the mountains. I'm curious what that means by the evil. So I don't really know exactly what the evil he's referring to is, whether it's the forces of evil, some sort of spectral enemy, or just danger. In other words, evil will befall him. Maybe he'll be taken a prisoner, what have you. Or there's just something about the mountains that he doesn't like. So he says, maybe let me go to this small city. And that's where they tell him he can go. So that's where he goes. We will now move on to the 4th portion. Genesis chapter 19, verse 21. And he said to him, Behold, I have favored you also as regards this matter, that I will not overturn the city that you have mentioned. Hasten, flee there, for I will not be able to do anything until you arrive there. Therefore he named the city Zoar. The sun came out upon the earth, and the lot came to Zoar. And the Lord caused to rain down upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord from heaven. And he turned over these cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and the vegetation of the ground. And his wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham arose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked over the face of Sodom and Gomorrah, and over the entire face of the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the earth had arisen like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham. And he sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction, when he overturned the cities in which Lot had dwelt. And Lot went up from Zoar, and he dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. So he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the elder said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on earth to come upon us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us give our father wine to drink, and let us lie with him, and let us bring to life seed from our father. And they gave their father wine to drink on that night. And the elder came and lay with her father, and he did not know of her lying down or of her rising up. And it came to pass on the morrow that the elder said to the younger, Behold, last night I lay with my father. Let us give him wine to drink tonight too. And come, lie with him, and let us bring to life seed from our father. So they gave their father to drink on that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know of her lying down or of her rising up. And Lot's 2 daughters conceived from their father. And the elder bore a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of Moab until this day. And the younger, she too bore a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the children of Ammon to this day. Chapter 20. And Abraham traveled from there to the land of the south, and he dwelt between Kadesh and between Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said about Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech the king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night, and he said to him, "Behold, you are going to die because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a married woman." And Abimelech had not come near to her, and he said, "O Lord, will you kill even a righteous nation? Did he not say to me, She is my sister? And even she said, He is my brother. With the innocence of my heart and with the purity of my hands have I done this." And God said to him in a dream, "I too know that you did this with the innocence of your heart, and I too have withheld you from sinning to me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. And now return the man's wife, because he is a prophet, and he will pray for you and live. But if you do not return her, know that you will surely die, you and all that is yours." And Abimelech rose early in the morning, and he summoned all his servants, and he spoke all these words in their ears, and the men were very frightened. And Abimelech summoned Abraham, and said to him, "What have you done to us, and what have I sinned against you, that you have brought upon me and upon my kingdom a great sin? Deeds that are not done you have done to me." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you see that you did this thing?" And Abraham said, "For I said, Surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And also, indeed, she is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, This is your kindness, which you shall do with me. Whither we come, say about me, He is my brother." And Abimelech took flocks and cattle and menservants and maidservants, and gave them to Abraham. And he restored to him his wife Sarah. And Abimelech said, "Here is my land before you. Wherever it pleases you, you may dwell." And to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. Behold, it is to you a covering of the eyes for all who are with you. And with all you shall contend." And Abraham prayed to God. And God healed Abimelech and his wife and his handmaids, and they gave birth. For the Lord had shut every womb of Abimelech's household because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Chapter 21, Genesis. Verse 1. And the Lord remembered Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham named his son who had been born to him, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Thus concludes the fourth portion. So quite a few things happen here. We have a story of Lot and then the story of Abraham. So starting with the first half, with Genesis chapter 19, verse 21, and he said to him, "Behold, I have favored you also as regards this matter, that I will not overturn the city that you have mentioned." So if we recall at the end of the previous portion, Lot was basically saying, well, rather than go to the mountains where I'll certainly die, why don't you let me be in this small city? Yeah. So what's interesting about that is it turns out the reason that he asked for that city is not because of being killed by the evil of the mountains, but because he was desperately trying to save someone. Because he made this request, and because he was found favorable in the eyes of the Lord, the city of Zoar was spared. So everything else was destroyed in the area. All the cities of the plains were wiped out, but not this city where Lot dwelt. So in other words, he couldn't save the people of the city he lived in. He couldn't save Sodom and Gomorrah. But at least, just as Abraham had negotiated down just 10 righteous men, Lot had very creatively managed to secure the survival of the city of Zoar. So it once again shows their passion, compassion, humanitarianism, and their love of their fellow man. And also earlier on, something I didn't mention about Abraham when he does begin negotiating, but he says, "I am but dust and ashes." So he acknowledges that I'm just some guy. I'm just a man. I'm not like you. I'm just of the earth. So it's the opposite of the Adam problem. Adam, who is a man made of dust and ashes, behaved a certain way. Abraham does not forget himself. He does not forget from where he comes from, and he does not forget his station beneath the Lord. I am but that small thing, but dust and ashes, but even so, I'm nothing but that, but if it would still be okay with you, I'd like to say something. So that humility is very important before the Lord. Things are pretty bad, though. the entire area is wiped out. And again, Lot was dwelling in the plains, and he was even warned, like, don't even stop there and don't turn around. Verse 26, unfortunately, someone did not listen. His wife looked from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So, just for looking upon the sheer awe of this power, this cleansing, she was turned to salt. Poof. In an instant. And again, why? Well, you can tell that these people really, really cared about where they lived, and they had some serious attachment to it. Otherwise, why would they fight so hard to stay? Why would they try so hard to save people, to not want to leave? This is why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was, oh, my dear city. Whatever the reason is, by looking back, she sealed her fate. Cut back to Abraham. You know, you can almost see this like the movie, like a cinematography of the Bible story. It cuts from Lot and his family fleeing to now far away, and you have Abraham looking over the plains from the distance and just seeing, wow, it's nothing but smoke. It's been completely glassed. It's gone. Behold, the smoke of the earth had risen like the smoke of a furnace. Wow. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham, and he sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction. In other words, we see the connection once again. It was because of Abraham that Lot was spared. Because of his favor that he found for Abraham, and Lot's own deeds also did a good job as well for securing the survival of Zoar. And Lot went up from Zoar, and he dwelt in the mountain, right? So he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, so he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. So even though he says, I'm afraid to, I don't want to stay in the mountains, the evil, I'll die. And what does he do? He goes and stays in the mountains, right? Despite what he said, he goes and lives there anyway. So that's pretty significant. And with him, he's got his 2 daughters, who basically, the dilemma is, it's just the 3 of them now. They live in a cave. They're totally isolated. And these girls who previously had suitors who were going to give them children, they're single. They're permanently single, right? And so, they don't want to not have children. So what they conspire to do is they get their father drunk and they sleep with him. And the language is very clear. Lot doesn't even know this is happening. They get him so drunk that he's not even aware of it. That he doesn't know they've arrived, and he doesn't know that they left. They just basically did it to him in his sleep, and they had children. And it also gives you their descendants, essentially, that come from this. Moab and the children of Ammon. So there we have it. Now, the story of Abraham, when he settles between Kadesh and Shur, we hear about Abimelech once again, and this is something from earlier, the story about Abimelech taking Sarah for a wife and not knowing that there were some concerns here, right? Now, this is something that we've already heard about happening, right? So Abraham telling Sarah, tell people that you're just my sister, and we'll be fine. So here we are again. But what's interesting this time, we learn the truth. So it turns out that Abraham did not actually lie, nor did Sarah lie. And I previously stated that, they said a lie. But no, Abraham actually confirms the truth of the matter. It's not that I lied. She is my sister. She is my father's daughter of a different mother. You heard my brother from another mother? Well, but from the same father. So in other words, she's his half-sister. Therefore, they are brother and sister, but not 100%. So he said, yeah, tell her that, tell him you're my sister. You are also my wife. Both are true, right? But God was very, very kind and basically came to Abimelech in a dream and told him the real story. He gave him the rundown, and he also said, I see in the innocence of your heart that you did this, and I too have withheld you from sinning to me. So basically God's saying, don't worry, I had your back and I understood that you were innocent. And what's also interesting here, this is the same situation as when Sarah earlier said, I did not laugh. So we're just seeing a recurring theme of God's mindfulness, the Lord's awareness of people's power, or rather awareness of people's thoughts through his powers. He sees the true nature of someone's heart, which is extremely significant. In other words, he did not commit the sin, and he sees that he did everything that he did not with wickedness, but from genuine innocence. Once again, I said before, there's a phrase we'll hear later, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. right? With the innocence of my heart and the purity of my hands have I done this. He didn't know any better. And because of this, the Lord took pity on him. But he also gives him the scoop. That man is a prophet. And he'll pray for you. So in other words, you do what I tell you. Not only will you get to survive, but you'll be prayed for. And everything that you're suffering will be resolved, is the ultimate outcome. So once Abimelech told the truth to his servants, what he had learned, they were filled with awe. But the end of it all, 2,000 pieces of silver, right? That is the last thing that he receives, or that Sarah receives. And also he tells Abraham, live wherever you want. So there are a couple things to consider about here. But, Abraham basically said, I did this because you people don't fear God, and I just didn't want to be killed for it. And now they clearly do fear God. So, she did this kindness, say that I'm your brother, and, go through all that for my sake, which he did it. So it's really nice. He ends up, giving Abraham and Sarah both something. And to Sarah he said, behold, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. Behold, it is to you a covering of the eyes for all who are with you. And with all you shall contend. So a covering of the eyes. I'm not 100% sure what that phrase means. A covering of the eyes. Does this mean a form of patching up what went wrong here? In other words, you've got all these things, 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is to you a covering of the eyes for all who are with you. In other words, this is for your dignity. A covering of the eyes. This situation, no longer people can't gossip about you. They all know the scoop here, okay? It'll be a covering of the eyes for all who are with you. And with all you shall contend. So, there you go. We'll just pretend this situation never happened. Here's a nice little summary, a little sum of cash, and we'll call it a day. And sure enough, Abraham fulfills the deed of restoring Abimelech. And finally, the end of the portion, we have the birth of Isaac despite everything. And then, of course, the circumcision of Isaac at 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Looking back on all those details, I do think it's quite interesting and cool that the ordeal happened so that Abraham could be safe in this area where he chose to dwell, and also just the importance of respect and really hiding the shame that someone else might have to endure because of an uncomfortable situation. Sarah really put herself through something here, but everything was made right. And Abimelech, for her sake, it seems, not just for Abraham, because he gave the cattle and everything, but for her, the coin. So that's certainly something significant. On to the fifth portion, Genesis chapter 21. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made joy for me. Whoever hears will rejoice over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne a son to his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making merry. And Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. But the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. And God said to Abraham, be not displeased concerning the lad and concerning your handmaid. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, for in Isaac will be called your seed. But also the son of the handmaid I will make into a nation, because he is your seed. And Abraham arose early in the morning, and he took bread and a leather pouch of water, and he gave to Hagar. He placed on her shoulder, and the child, and he sent her away. And she went and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. And the water was depleted from the leather pouch, and she cast the child under one of the bushes. And she went and sat down from afar, at about the distance of 2 bowshots, for she said, let me not see the child's death. And she sat from afar, and she raised her voice and wept. And God heard the lad's voice, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, and said to her, What is troubling you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the lad's voice in the place where he is. Rise, pick up the lad, and grasp your hand upon him, for I shall make him into a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the pouch with water, and gave the lad to drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and he dwelt in the desert, and he became an archer. And he dwelt in the desert of Paran, and his mother took for him a wife from the land of Egypt. Wow. So here we have the circumstances around Isaac's birth, and also the exile of Isaac's brother Ishmael and his mother Hagar. This is easily one of the most painful things, I'm sure, for most people to read about regarding this broken family, but also for Abraham himself. So at 100 years old, Isaac is born. Great. And, that's all good. Sarah's having a great time. God has made joy for me. Who would have thought that I would nurse children, right? And so when the child grew and was weaned, Abraham made a feast. So it's the fact that she got to have a child and nurse that child herself. And then once his weaning was done, he had a great feast to basically commemorate the miracle that took place. It was a party. It was kind of almost like a birthday party, really. But it was a party to commemorate all the good. Now, this is really something that comes off as very cruel, but it says that she saw the son of Hagar making merry. And she said, "Drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son." But Abraham doesn't like it. Frankly, he really doesn't like it, right? And God literally has to intervene and say, don't be upset, all right? Do not be displeased regarding this. So, interesting. Why does this happen? It's all just like before. Hagar is afflicted, right? Things like that. And she flees, but then she goes back and takes her lickings, but she gets to stick around. Well, it's basically a repeat of before. So he sends them off begrudgingly. Initially, he doesn't like how it's going, but God tells him, do what your wife says. And so Abraham obeys as always. Hagar, in the desert, she sees that her son's going to die, and it's so traumatic for her that she leaves him to die out of sight so that she won't have to watch her son die. It's very sad. But with all her cries and his cries, they are saved. And what I think is really beautiful about this, the Lord is with him. There's a certain birthright that's promised to Isaac, right? But there's a statement that is repeated throughout, that the Lord was with him. That's used throughout the stories of the entire Torah. A person with whom the Lord is with basically means they live with the blessing of the Lord. The Lord was with him. And look at Ishmael. Look, he was making merry on his own little brother's weaning feast. So it's practically like Isaac's birthday celebration. All he did wrong was be not Sarah's child. And he's having fun and actually, get rid of that kid. But even though that happened, doesn't matter. God is with him. He will be a great nation. There's still a promise for him. And he becomes an archer, right? And then we also see that Hagar's eyes were opened up to this well, which she can use to save her son and herself from dying of thirst. I do want to bring another point here. Why is it that right before this, the Torah portion covered the situation with Avimelech and Sarah? We already heard this story, right? So why are we hearing about it again, right before this moment? That is the answer. So I said this in the previous episode, that when Sarah says, let the Lord judge between us, when she's frustrated with Abraham, as Hagar is basically no longer looking to Sarah with respect, and she's like, why don't we just let the Lord decide between us, huh? Who's right and wrong? And the repetition of the story of what happened with Avimelech, again, Abraham asked Sarah to do this kindness for him, to lie so that he could survive. Or not lie, but to say that you're just my sister, or just say that you're my sister, right? So she did this for Abraham, and because she went through this entire charade, Abraham benefited greatly. So bringing this up again, it's almost like a bit of a character redemption, or to soften the blow a little bit for those reading about Sarah, being like, wow, how heartless to get rid of Hagar and Ishmael when they have every right to be there, but she's casting them out? What right does she have to be so cruel? What right does she have to ask that of her husband? Well, now we see what right she has. She has that right because of what great thing she did for her husband. She went through that entire Avimelech ordeal for his sake. So that just gives us some context. And now we see what it was that she was saved with, which was this well. And we're now going to move into the sixth portion for Vayera. Chapter 21, verse 22. Now it came to pass at that time that Avimelech and Phicol, his general, said to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. And now swear to me, here by God, that you will not lie to me or to my son or to my grandson. According to the kindness that I have done with you, you shall do with me, and with the land wherein you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham contended with Avimelech about the well of water that the servants of Avimelech had forcibly seized. And Avimelech said, I do not know who did this thing, neither did you tell me, nor did I hear until today. And Abraham took flocks and cattle and gave them to Avimelech, and they both formed a covenant. And Abraham placed 7 ewe lambs by themselves. And Avimelech said to Abraham, What are these 7 ewe lambs which you have placed by themselves? And he said, For these 7 ewe lambs you shall take from my hand, in order that it be to me for a witness that I dug this well. Therefore he named the place Beersheba, for there they both swore. And they formed a covenant in Beersheba, and Avimelech and Phicol his general arose, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. And he planted an Ishel in Beersheba, and he called there in the name of the Lord, the God of the world. And Abraham dwelt in the land of the Philistines for many days. So here we have this is a chronological flashback. This is to signify a miracle that sort of takes place, right? So here she is in Beersheba, in the previous portion, Hagar. Now we get a flashback to a time. At that time, it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, his general, said to Abraham, the God is with you in all you do, etc., etc. Right? So this is at that time, like it all comes together. This well that Hagar just found was revealed to her. Turns out, it may very well be the same well that Abraham dug and claimed in this sixth portion. So it's something that Abraham did at a different time that now, at this time he went and did this, and then sure enough, it saves his son's life. This well saves Ishmael's life, and it's the well that he basically went through a whole covenant deal with, forming a pact with Abimelech, which is, not only did they form a pact, and they had an issue, actually. This is another thing. This is a story about a little bit of a contention that goes on. This happens earlier with Lot and Abraham also. Their herdsmen get into a little bit of an argument. Well, it seems that Abraham has a well that he himself dug, that Abimelech's servants basically took as their own. They forced it upon, they seized it. And Abimelech says, listen, I don't know anything about this. You didn't tell me about this. And until today, I didn't know about it. So once again, he's just swearing his innocence because literally he just doesn't know better. Things happen that he doesn't know about, and how is he supposed to be punished for that? So he also asks Abraham to deal with him honestly. So this is also one of those situations where I think he's learned a little bit. I got to be extra careful. We got to make sure that we're all on the same page here. And Abraham's like, I swear, we'll do so. We'll be honest with each other. And so they basically, they have the flocks and everything, and they form this covenant. So it's binding. It is binding that Abraham will speak honestly through all time, basically. Swear to me here by God that you will not lie to me or to my son or to my grandson. According to the kindness that I have done with you, you shall do with me and with the land wherein you have sojourned. So this is a covenant that they make that basically they're going to generationally look out for each other. The descendants of Abimelech will be dealt with kindly and fairly, just as Abimelech dealt kindly and fairly with Abraham, and they make a covenant, and Abraham sanctifies and seals the deal with an offering. But he also includes 7 ewe lambs, and he says, what are these for? And he's like, basically, I'm giving you this in order for you to testify, or as a witness, this is my well. All right, I dug this well. So That's where they both made an agreement. You shall take from my hand these lambs. In exchange, you'll acknowledge that this is my well, no one else's. Okay? So that's the deal that they make. And Abraham dwelt in the land of the Philistines for many days. And the place was named Beersheba. But now we know why it was called that. And again, this is a bit of a flashback moment where we see the background context for the miracle that takes place with Hagar, who's losing her son. But then suddenly, what do I find? Boom. A beautiful well that will save our boy. And now we know the origin of that well may very well be this moment with Abimelech. So it all comes together. Now for the final portion, Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Please take your son, your only one, whom you love, yea, Isaac, and go away to the land of Moriah, and bring him up there for a burnt offering on one of the mountains, of which I will tell you. And Abraham arose early in the morning, and he saddled his donkey, and he took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering. And he arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will prostrate ourselves and return to you. And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, and he placed upon his son Isaac. And he took it into his hand, the fire and the knife, and they both went together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And they both went together. And they came to the place of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham built the altar there, and arranged the wood. And he bound Isaac his son, and placed him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slaughter his son. And an angel of God called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not stretch forth your hand to the lad, nor do the slightest thing to him. For now I know that you are a God-fearing man, and you did not withhold your son, your only one, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw, and lo, there was a ram, after it was caught in a tree by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham named that place, The Lord will see. As it is said to this day, On the mountain the Lord will be seen. And an angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven. And he said, By myself have I sworn, says the Lord, that because you have done this thing, and you did not withhold your son, your only one, that I will surely bless you. And I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your descendants will inherit the cities of their enemies. And through your children shall be blessed all the nations of the world, because you hearkened to my voice. And Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham remained in Beersheba. And it came to pass after these matters, that it was told to Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she also bore sons to Nahor your brother. Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel the father of Aram, and Kesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel begot Rebekah. These 8 did Milcah bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And his concubine, whose name was Reumah, had also given birth to Tebah and Gaham, and Tahash and Maacah. And that concludes our weekly portion with the binding of Isaac. So it's almost a very straightforward sort of story compared to some of the other ones. There's not a whole lot to question here about what it means. Abraham is called, and he always answers, Here I am. I've heard this spoken about before, the recurring statement of, Here I am, here I am. And it comes up multiple times. The phrase comes up, it's repeated. You could even consider that to be the name of this particular portion. Here I am. This chapter 22, is Here I am, right? So he goes to make the sacrifice because that's what he's told to do. And that's basically it. He brings the lad, he brings the men with him, and he goes to sacrifice Isaac to the Lord as he is commanded to do. And he's willing to do it. But he doesn't even tell Isaac explicitly what he's doing. You can imagine the misery, the pain of knowing that he's giving up his boy. And maybe part of him feels not just because of his conviction to serve the Lord, but also maybe it's because of what he did to Ishmael. He also has a sort of degree of pain. His only son now, Ishmael's gone. So Isaac, who's given to him, may also be taken away. And he's willing to take that. He's willing to accept that judgment. So here I am. And even Isaac is like, well, what's going to be the offering? We don't have an animal. The Lord will provide it. And it turns out the test is passed. The whole thing was just meant to test if Abraham was truly, truly, truly a man of God to this extent that he would even do that. And he was. But the Lord saw that conviction, saw that Abraham was not playing around. He's going to do it. So he stops him. And he gives him a ram. He doesn't say, like, there's a ram over there. Abraham looks up and he sees it. And it's not just there. It's literally a ram caught by its horns. So there you have it. Because of this great deed, the promise of the generations to come is made. Once again, it's affirmed. In other words, we are firmly sealing this covenant forever. Because you hearkened to my voice. Through your children shall be blessed all the nations of the world. And now we conclude learning about some situations going on in Abraham's family. His brother Nahor has had several children. And so we learn about these lineages just briefly. We learn about the different people who were born. And there's also mention of Rebekah. These 8 did Milcah bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And his concubine, she had children too. So that is some foreshadowing or some significance for later in the story. But at least this is just some knowledge about what's going on inside of Abraham's family. But all worked out in the end. And thus concludes Vayera with the binding of Isaac and then the eventual dwelling for a while in Beersheba. Whew, all's well that ends well. Pretty tough situation to be in for Abraham, but he pulled through as he always does, and things worked out. So I suppose the takeaway for this, we have to look at the miracles that have transpired all throughout Abraham's life because of his conviction, as well as his devotion. But at the very end, he's tested one final time. Remember, it said earlier in Genesis that the Lord will limit the lives of mankind to 120 years. So Abraham is in his last 20 years of life. I mean, this is the home stretch here. There's not a whole lot left for him to do. And this is one of those really significant, momentous things, giving up the son who he loves. But think about it in the broader sense. What is your level of conviction? The listener, right? You. How far would you go by the command of the Lord? If the Lord told you to kill someone you loved, to sacrifice them, something like that, do you have that level of devotion? Abraham did. He didn't have to go through with it, but it showed that he was willing. And that test, it's important to remember, like the idea of these tests, there are certain high levels of expectations on Abraham because of all the things that they've discussed. So, he passed the final test. He is truly a man of God. And in the beginning it says, God is with him in all he does, right? That was Avimelech used that phrase, God is with you in the previous portion. So just again, this is the significance of that. And this is why God is with him, because he was this level of convicted as a true servant of the Lord. Well, that pretty much concludes Vayera. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear any thoughts you may have about this particular Torah portion. It's certainly very significant, especially the binding of Isaac being one of the most significant stories in the Torah and throughout Western history. Its significance across the board is truly great. So it's definitely one to think about. But also, let's not forget the stories that lead up to it in the Torah portion for Vayera. But chapter 22 of Genesis is definitely the big one for a lot of people. It's just a lot to think about. In any case, thank you so much for listening. This has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast. And once again, Thank you so much for joining me in our study of Torah, and hopefully you've taken away something from this of significance to carry with you. I certainly have myself. Until next time, this is Shmuel Moshe. Baruch Hashem.